Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to be creating an interactive card and we're going to be featuring the new Best in Show stamp set. This is the newest stamp set from Birdie Brown and it has some really adorable dog images as well as a bunch of different accessory stamps so that you can kind of create interactive cards where the dogs are jumping over various things. So I wanted to definitely have one of the dogs being able to actually move on my card. So I'm going to be using the Leaping Slider Channels Die-namics to create a channel that's going to allow our dog to actually leap over the little fence that we're going to add to the scene. So the first thing that we need to do before we start to assemble all of the pieces is we need to create the panels that are going to form our scene. So I need a sky piece as well as a grass piece. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm adding some peacock feathers distressing to a white cardstock panel. This measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I will end up trimming this down slightly so that it fits onto my card base. I went in with peacock feathers and covered the entire thing with that distress ink, and then I went in with my mini cloud edges stencil to add a little bit of cloud detail to the background. I didn't want it super obvious, so that's why I added the ink color first and then added the clouds over top. If you want your clouds to be a little bit more prominent on the design, then you would add those just directly to the white background and not add that distress ink first. Once I had the clouds on there, I added a little bit of water to give it a bit of a distressed look, and then I set that aside to dry so I could create the grass portion. So for this area here, I'm doing the exact same thing. I have another panel of cardstock, and I'm adding some mowed lawn and twisted citron distress inks. I'm just adding it to the bottom area since I know I'm going to die cut this, and then I once again added some water to give it a little bit of a distressed look. So once I had both of my panels completely inked and I had allowed them to dry, I went ahead and die cut the grassy border from the green piece, and now I'm just kind of laying out my die and my stamps to figure out where I need to position that slider channel so that everything is going to fit onto my card base. Once I had the layout figured out, I went ahead and removed my grass piece, and now I'm going to take a piece of repositionable tape and I'm going to adhere it onto this die so that I know it's not going to move in my die cutting machine when I do the die cutting. I want to make sure that it stays exactly where I have it since I've already laid out everything and know that I have the placement where I need it. So I did run that through my die cut machine, and you can see we get this little interior piece, and you don't want to throw that away. We're going to actually use that and we're going to adhere it to the card base. So I'm using a Grout gray card base, and I have the main panel over top of my card base just so I know exactly where the interior piece of the channel needs to go. And then I added liquid glue to that piece and I adhered it directly onto my card base. The large panel piece is going to get attached with foam adhesive once we have all of the slider mechanism pieces attached into the channel. So now I have a slider element here. This is a little plastic piece. It almost looks like a little tic-tac that's flat on both sides. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adhere this first to a little cardstock circle that I've cut out. I like to use 1/8 inch score tape to add this to my circle. You can use liquid glue if you would prefer. It does take a little bit to dry though, so you're going to have a little bit of patience. I prefer to just get everything done right away, and I really like how the score tape holds everything together. So that is my preferred method for attaching this. So what I did is I first attached that little tic-tac plastic piece to the circle. I put it into the channel opening so that the plastic piece was facing up, and then I added some additional adhesive on the top of it and adhered my dog die cut directly on there. So I stamped and die cut both my dog and my little fence off camera. These are both from Best of Show, and I just colored them in with Copic markers. And now we're just adding the pieces to the slider mechanism so that our dog will move through that channel. So I found out when I added him in there that because we only have the slider channel at the front of him, he was kind of wiggly and he went really far off of the card. I didn't want him to go down quite as far on the one side, so I decided to add another little plastic piece. This is actually a spin and slide disc. It's the exact same as the slider element, except this one is round instead of long. And I'm mainly using this one as a stopper and just to kind of help support the dog more in the channel so that it stays exactly how we have it positioned. So I just added that the exact same way. I used the 1/8 inch score tape and then I added a little cardstock circle on the back. Another way to help control how far down the dog goes in the slider channel is to position your grass kind of higher up, which will make him stop a little bit sooner. So I added tape runner adhesive to the entire piece of grass, and then I also added some liquid glue at the very top where we have the little pointy pieces of grass. And I did this just because we have a lot of movement on the card, and I didn't want our little dog here to kind of get stuck on the grass pieces. So by adding the liquid glue, it just ensures that that grass is really adhered down onto the panel. Once I had it fully adhered, I just flipped the panel over and used my scissors to cut off the excess, and now we can go ahead and assemble the rest of the scene onto this panel. So I added the little fence there with some foam adhesive. I wanted to give it a little bit of dimension, and I just kind of kept moving the dog through the channel to figure out exactly where to position that fence so that it would look like he was actually jumping over it. Once I had that done, it was time to create our sentiment strip. So I stamped our sentiment onto black licorice cardstock using Versamark ink. This is a clear sticky ink that works really nicely with embossing powder. I heat set that with white embossing powder, and then I die cut it with a slanted sentiment strip. I'm just using some foam adhesive here to add this to our card front. I wanted to add a little bit of dimension where I could. You just have to make sure that anywhere you're adding dimension isn't anywhere that the dog is going to interfere with it. So I was pretty safe with the fence and the little sentiment strip since I knew that the dog wouldn't be in any of these areas. I realized that when I had adhered everything, it kind of looked like the fence was floating in air, so I wanted to ground it a bit onto that grass. So what I did is I just took a Copic marker. I like to use W markers, which are a warm gray, and I just added a little bit of color underneath of that fence area just to give it a bit of shadow to make it look like it was actually sitting on the ground. And then once we had that done, now we can add this entire panel to our card base. So just remember, we want to use foam adhesive to add this to the card base, and you want to make sure you don't have any foam adhesive anywhere near that channel. So we don't want to have anything that's going to hit those little round pieces on the back that's going to prevent our dog from moving. Once we have the foam adhesive on there, we can add it to the card base. You want to line it up right over top of that little piece that we added to the card base originally, and now we have a complete scene and our dog moves back and forth through the channel. Now, once I had it done, she looked a little bit plain. I decided she was a girl dog, and I wanted to add a little bit of something to her just to give a pop of color since we don't have a lot of color going on. So I used the Happy Hippos stamp set and stamped and die cut a little bow from that set. And then I also stamped and die cut some clouds from the Up in the Air stamp set. I just thought it would be nice to have a little bit of something up in the sky area just to fill our scene even more. And then to finish off the card, I added some clear sequins, making sure not to put any of them where the dog was going to move. And then I filled the centers of those sequins with some silver stickles. And that is going to complete our interactive card where we actually have the dog moving and jumping over the little fence. I love creating cards like this. It's just so unexpected when the recipient receives it and realizes that there's moving pieces on the card. I hope this card gave you some ideas on ways that you can use our interactive channel dies to create movement on your various cards. All of the supplies I've used are linked in the video description below, and as always, I appreciate you being here for another video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.